Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Oh, this episode is cool. This episode is different. This episode is about something that I love. One might say I'm obsessed with, that many of you love too. And we're talking about coffee. Yes, we're talking about coffee, a little bit different. We are talking about coffee and mental health, um, both from a social standpoint. Does it bring us together? What happens when we drink coffee or other caffeinated or other warm beverages? We get into some things on the coffee periphery. We talk about some of the ethical considerations of coffee, what we know about coffee and mental health. It's a really fun episode. Today I'm speaking with Shawn Steiman, who is a PhD, a coffee scientist, a consultant, and an entrepreneur. His coffee research has included coffee production, pest management, ecology, physiology, biochemistry. I can't even say all of it. And brewing. Um, he owns Coffee Consulting, a coffee-centric consulting firm, and Grok Coffee, a coffee delivery, event, and education company. He was also a co-founder of Daylight Mind Coffee Company. He's authored numerous articles in scientific journals, trade magazines, newsletters, and newspapers. He's the author of the Hawaii Coffee Book, a gourmet's guide to Kona and Kauai, the Little Coffee Know-It-All, a miscellany for growing, roasting, and brewing, uncompromising and unapologetic, and is co-editor and author of Coffee, a comprehensive guide to the bean, the beverage, and the industry. I was looking at those books online. I have to ask you, Shawn, which I should start with. You can find him at grokcoffee.net, coffeeconsulting.com, and of course, we'll link all that in the show notes. Well, he's a lot of fun and super smart, and I really appreciated this one. Shawn Steiman, we're already giggling, so I know this is going to be a good one.
Absolutely.
welcome, welcome to Beyond Trauma. I'm thrilled to have you on. This is a very different episode for us.
I'm honored to be Black Swan in your in your podcast experience.
I think this is going to be very exciting for our listeners. As you know, we're here to talk to you today about one of my greatest pleasures in life, coffee.
So easy to love.
And I want to know that it's okay to love it. So I'm going to be asking you a lot about that. But let's just start with you. How did you get into coffee?
Well, if you ask my mom, which I've done, she said I was drinking it pretty young. And then my first memory of ordering coffee is when I was 10. So it's been a part of my life for a long time. And it just developed into a hobby. And then there's that moment finishing my undergrad. I had no plans, no ideas, no focus, and for a variety of reasons, I had this opportunity to move to Hawaii and study coffee in graduate school. And I thought, how bad could that be for 2 years? Yeah. Well, then it just, then I stayed on for the PhD and the postdoc, and then, after all that, clearly coffee is a thing I needed to be doing. So that's what I do. I do coffee.
Wow. And like, what is it about coffee that captures you?
It's a great question, and it's one of the few questions I really have a hard time answering. Um, I think in some ways, if when I was in high school, I could have easily been drinking alcohol, then I may have gravitated towards one of those as a specialty. But, when you're less than 21, you can't. So I had this biased opportunity to dive into coffee a little bit. And the reality is that uh, there are people out there who just love to taste things. And tasting
Mhm.
has an emotional component for them, an intellectual component for them. And it's just something that resonates with us. And so I'm one of those people. And given infinite time, I would probably dive deep into many things. And coffee is something I love so much because coffee can just be a cup of coffee, but it can be this enormous rabbit hole of culture and science and experience and all sorts of things. Like, it can be whatever you want it to be, but the depth is there, as it is for other things.
Yeah.
and I grabbed it early, and I've just been doing it for a long time.
That's so cool. I love what you brought up about like different senses attract different
Mm.
people. I mean,
Hmm.
most of us, they say, are sight dominant, and I hadn't thought about like some people might be taste or oral dominant.
It's you've probably had meals with people who just really love to eat. They're kind of obnoxious, but they're also can be kind of fun because they guide an experience that you wouldn't otherwise have. I'm one of those people. My sister's one of those people, and there are other people in my life like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a thing.
So tell us a little about, I mean, and you can state this from what science you know or about your own personal experience about like what is happening to you when you're enjoying this, the taste, the aroma, the texture of a great cup of coffee.
I will, but I think we just have to get it out of the way that for many people, and some mornings myself also, coffee has this great thing called caffeine, and that it's a really important aspect of the experience, which then guides how we feel and think. Um, and honestly, there are many mornings where oh, hold on, are we break up? There are many mornings where I have coffee, and the first cup is just a pleasure to start the day with, but I'm really hoping it's going to kick in that caffeine. And honestly, really, I think most mornings, the first part of coffee is just about the routine and the comfort and the joy of the familiar.
Mm.
Future cups, or if I brew coffee or go out for coffee later in the day, they tend to be experiences where I'm really focusing on what's happening with the smell and the taste and the texture. Because I have a child, we have school to get ready for and breakfast to make and all those things. So the very first cup was just part of it's like comfort of the familiar, of the routine, I think. Probably
Yeah.
looping it. I feel like there's got to be a more romantic way of saying this.
No, I think there's something very powerful about that, right? I mean, for a lot of people, like that routine is, like you said, very comforting, very comfortable. It adds structure to the day. Like that familiar makes us feel very stable, very like held. And coffee as a way of doing that. Having a morning ritual, a
Mm.
way that we start the day, that we approach the day, something warm, especially well, not everyone takes their coffee warm, but I can't get into the people that are icing their coffee, but we can, we can, I don't care if it's 100 degrees, but, the holding of the cup and people have their favorite coffee mug. And so these are grounding things in a time, in a time when life is can be confusing, when things can be always changing. Having a bit of structure, especially in the start of the day, can be something for mental health.
Absolutely. In fact, my wife, who, if she can't get decent coffee in the morning, will switch to some other hot beverage, tea or cocoa, because it has that grounding aspect to the day.
And I know you mentioned caffeine,
Mm.
um, and I know some people will be feeling like, well, we're talking about caffeine. Is that healthy for us? Is that addictive for us? Like, is it a good thing? Can you tell us a little bit about like the history of people using caffeine and what we know about what it does to our system?
Yeah, I will tell you as much as I can. Um, so caffeine is prominent in a few things that are pretty prevalent, mostly coffee and tea. You can obviously find some in chocolate, but it's not nearly as concentrated. And there's some other random things, but really those three things are the top three sources of caffeine for humanity. So, well, up to like 100 years ago, once we started putting in other things like toothpaste and soda. Um, but if we go historical, like people discovered these things, they started making beverages out of them and foods out of them, and the all the stories talk about how people could, especially religious people, could stay up later to do religious experiences and get through the night with it. And there are even stories in coffee, for example, where um, that coffee was sacred and people couldn't, the average person couldn't just have it. So
Wow.
the stimulation effect, both of the mind and the body, is pretty powerful. And almost everybody I've ever known has had some caffeine experience, right? Where you, if you're not, your body's not acclimated to it, you're not tolerant of it, then it increases your blood flow. It makes your heart speed up and the mind race. And there's a lot of data on caffeine and what it does. It helps short term memory. It can do all sorts of things, but it's very temporary. For most people, it's completely harmless. You ingest it, it does its thing, it goes away. It is a little addictive for most people if you don't have it regularly, right? You have some withdrawal symptoms, headaches and aches and some other things, and that varies by the person. But for the large, vast majority of the population, it seems to be pretty innocuous. But nothing's innocuous for everybody. There's always some other cases. Um, there's the history of caffeine or coffee is pretty interesting because in the 50s and 60s and 70s, I don't exactly know the decade, but back when people started researching health in foods, there was this fear that coffee was really bad for us. It was cancer causing and it was terrible and we shouldn't do it. And as it turns out, it was just bad statistics. People weren't separating out that a lot of people who drank coffee also smoked. It's like
Yeah.
a lot of the problems are from the smoking, right? Which we've eventually discovered. Uh, and now, if you look at the coffee research on health, it's almost like a miracle drug, but it has limitations, right? It's not like the world is full of superhumans who are drinking coffee. So I'm going to take all the research with a grain of salt, partially because of how the research takes place, but also because of, well, we just know that we're not a race of superhumans drinking coffee every day.
Can you delve into a little bit more about like what the studies are saying, what they're pointing towards?
Yeah, there's a lot. But first, I want to talk about what most of the studies are like. So, in a perfect scientific world, you'd get some populations of people, you'd break them up, you'd randomly select people, you'd break them into groups, and you'd have them do things. In this case, drink coffee or not drink coffee, and then you'd control for all these things. That doesn't really work with the day-to-day lives of people. So, most of our research on things like coffee is from giant studies where people have asked, hundreds or thousands, usually thousands of people to report on their habits, all sorts of habits, depending on the study. And these studies might go on for decades and decades. And then after at some point, the researchers are looking at this data and saying, can we see any patterns in the data from what people have reported? And oftentimes they do. And that's a lot of the coffee health data we get is from studies like this. So you may have been asked, to record how many cups of coffee did you drink this month or last week, do this over the course of many years. And people aren't great at remembering and self-reporting. So all of this data has got to be sort of taken with a little generosity. But there's a lot of this data with coffee. So it looks like, right, coffee's spectacular for reducing things like type 2 diabetes and liver cancer. And there's some recent data last couple of years showing it can improve longevity. It can, there's a whole list. I probably should have gotten it for you, but there's really nothing coffee can't do, it seems. If you're the general population, obviously there are people who will respond negatively to it. I've heard people who are allergic to caffeine, who, the sensitivity to that or the responses are bad for them. But in almost all cases, more coffee is usually better. I remember when I first started reading about coffee and health, the way a culture will do their study will, of course, depend on how coffee is drunk there. So in the U.S., right, you'd get things like, the groupings would be, do you drink 0 to 2 cups a day, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, and it usually, taps out around 6 for places like the U.S. But in places like Finland, they would tap out at like 10 to 12 cups a day. And all the data would show that, the more cups, the better for whatever the thing they're looking at. Now, of course, the other problem with all this research is that, how are you making and drinking the coffee? What's the volume? What's the concentration of things? Is it a 2-ounce cup, a 6-ounce cup, a 12-ounce cup? This is often not as carefully controlled. So in general, you'll find a lot of data, a lot of reports showing that coffee is good for us, or can be helpful in little ways across a huge range of health factors. I don't feel any more healthy than other people who don't drink coffee, though. That's kind of what I want to say is that
Yeah.
there's statistically significant differences across the population,
Mhm.
right? Maybe I will not get type 2 diabetes. Maybe I won't get Parkinson's. Is it just coffee that's been doing it? You know,
Right. We
what
don't want to
percent of it?
overpromise or overstate.
Exactly, exactly. But I think it's very clear that coffee is not bad for us, right? That
And
is
the cup size,
overwhelmingly clear.
the cup size really stuck out to me because in America we like everything really big, and I'm just like
Yes.
imagining just knowing what little I do about other places. Their sizes are not quite like ours. And you also mentioned, and maybe you can explain for us a little more about the concentration and the different ways that coffee is made and how that impacts the caffeine.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. So just caffeine alone, and we'll use caffeine as an example because it will be true of other compounds as well. Um, so we brew coffee, we sort of think of three major different ways of doing it. You could do it by pouring water over a bed of coffee, like your drip pot or pour over. You can immerse them together, like in a French press, where they're sitting together for a few minutes before you filter it. Or you can put water under high pressure through the coffee, and usually that means a metal filter. So these methods alone will influence, what method you will determine how much coffee and water you use, and whether you use pressure or not will have an influence on what gets extracted. So traditionally we think of high pressure being espresso, right, which can come out, let's say 2 ounces of espresso versus an 8-ounce cup of coffee that's done with a filter system with water being poured over coffee. If you look at the concentration of the espresso, it's way higher in every regard. It's like let's say it's 5% coffee and 95% water, whereas dripped coffee is going to be like 1.5% coffee and 98.5% water. So the espresso is just more concentrated in everything, including caffeine. And that's partially because of the high pressure, and it's partially because of the ratio of coffee to water that's used. So if you take 2 ounces of espresso and compare it to 2 ounces of drip coffee, espresso has more of everything. But we don't usually compare it that way, right? You usually compare 2 ounces of espresso to an 8 or 12-ounce cup of drip, which is just so much more liquid that you get more stuff
Mm.
just because of the volume you're consuming. So that's just a simple comparison. Never mind, how are people brewing it, or are they using a paper filter or metal filter? Right? Back in the late 90s, people were really concerned about coffee influencing cholesterol in blood. And it showed that an amazing thing is that the things that were causing increase in cholesterol levels were absorbed by paper filters, but not absorbed by metal filters. So
I have
just
a
tell
story
you,
about that.
I totally want to hear it because even though I've been reading about this for decades, I still haven't found okay, so it changes and I haven't looked that hard. That's the caveat.
Well,
All right, so it increases your cholesterol level, but how much? Is it really significant? I don't know. So tell me what you know.
well, I went in for my annual physical, and this is a year ago, and my numbers are always like they've never been elevated. Now I am getting older, right? I was 44 at that time, but I'm extremely healthy. I'm with the whole yoga thing and whatnot,
Yeah, right.
um, and I have this cholesterol that's not super high, but above where they want it to be, right? And for the first time ever. So my doctor, who wasn't very good, I switched doctors, writes me this, like through the platform, all these recommendations about my diet, and I'm like, we just had a hour-long session where I told you what I eat. Like I eat plant-based, all this stuff. I go, this can't be it. So I do my own research. See, I didn't know about that. I did not know about that. Wasn't paying attention to that in the 90s. And I learn about coffee. And at that time, I had been using French press.
Mm.
So I decided to do my own personal experiment. Now, my parents are like, no, it just runs in the family, high cholesterol. My husband was like, kind of not believing me. No one was really believing me. I'm like, that's fine. I switch over my whole coffee making to Chemex with the
Uh-huh.
paper
Yep.
filter. I do this religiously for a year. I go back in, big cholesterol drop. It's the only thing I changed.
Hmm,
So I
fascinating.
went around, told everyone, and they're all believers now.
It's a thing, right? So and it's kind of depressing because you had to. I love full immersion coffee too, and I love metal filters. That's why I normally drink it myself. So I probably could reduce my cholesterol too if I if I switched. Uh, my doctor didn't said I
I
had to.
really enjoy it. I mean, you know more. My issue is the temperature because I like my coffee very hot.
Mm,
So I've now had to invest in some other things because I find it doesn't stay hot enough.
yeah, well, there are brewers that brew right into a thermos, like
Yeah,
that are kind of
yeah.
like Slack. And there's also you could also just pour it right into the thermos.
I
There's lots of ways around it.
I'm like pouring into my to go cup. I'm pouring into my ember. So I do like three. I'm drinking one cup right away. There's a whole system.
So it makes you so. I one of my companies is I brew coffee at a farmer's market, and I brew in Chemexes because they're the right tool for the job. And for 4 hours, right? First 2 hours, right? People pretty constant, right? And it slows down as it gets later in the morning. And I get this problem, right? It's cooling down,
Yeah.
and I'm like you, like I want it so hot that I can drink at the perfect temperature. And so I feel bad when these customers come and I want hot coffee, and I say, well, we feel this. Oh, that's perfect. Like, what are you talking about? It's not iced coffee, right? But it's to each his or her own.
That's right. That's right. We're not going to shame anyone. However, you're getting your coffee is great.
Yeah, there's no right answer.
There's no right answer. Yeah. But it
Thanks
looks
for
like,
sharing your story. That's really encouraging to fit the data to the real life.
yeah. And it was so cool that you said that because I didn't know on my own. And I don't know if it's common knowledge.
It should be, because like I said, it's been around for a really long time in the medical community. But doctors have to know a lot, and I can see how some doctors, and no person would know, right? Why would you stumble upon that by accident unless you're looking for it? So
Yeah. Well,
kudos
cholesterol
to
is
you for finding
something,
it.
most of us deal with, especially as we get older. So it is good to have some basic, quick things like that that you can do.
Right. And you can still drink great coffee, right? Giving up the metal filter is not a deal breaker for quality coffee.
Not a deal breaker at all. Not a deal breaker at all.
So
Rather,
do you find, I need to ask, now that so French press is great because you just add the water and you walk away, you come back and it's done.
yeah.
Have you found any delight in the ritual of pouring and having to pay attention to things, or is that really annoying?
No, I actually have. And I'm not always known as the most patient person, um, which is, why maybe I was attracted to yoga, meditation, mindfulness to help me develop that. And I've actually I like it. I like pouring the water over, over the filter, releasing you dump out like the first pour, so you don't get that paper taste, and then you pour it over the grinds. I mean, you have to tell me if I'm doing this wrong, and you let the gases like release. um, so I do the basic. I don't. You'd probably like school me. I don't do really the weighing. I'm kind of like eyeing the coffee to water ratio.
As long as you don't mind the variation, it's fine.
Yeah.
Um, do you use the brown filters or the white filters?
They're like beige. Is
Beige.
that
So
brown?
Chemex also makes white ones that don't have the paper flavor and they're
Oh,
not bleached
okay.
with chlorine anymore. So you might want to try those. You don't have to pre-rinse it. That's what I'm saying. The
I can
brown ones you totally should, but the white ones I don't need. I don't feel yet.
quicken my ritual.
That's right.
The pre-rinse also puts that hot water that kind of heats
Heats up the Chemex, yeah.
My father puts his mugs in the toaster oven, but that's a story for another. I guess the whole family likes our beverages very hot.
Genetic, apparently.
So we mentioned some of the, some of like the physical pros and cons of coffee drinking, some of the research. Um, I'm curious if there's anything you want to say about mental health wise, anything about, like, I know there are some studies about depression. I'm not sure if you're aware of them.
I do follow it a little bit. So just for your listeners, my PhD is not in physical medicine. I'm not a medical doctor. My degrees are in horticulture, basically. But I spent a lot of time studying other areas of coffee, and because I'm so into it, of course, I read all the medical studies and don't usually read the medical literature, but I read the new stuff. And I got some medical books up on my coffee shelf. So this is not my super area of expertise. I just want to put that out there. So there does seem to be certainly short-term benefits to coffee on mental health, not just mental abilities, but on depression and short term. And I don't know if it's a long term benefit, but I assume if you're regularly drinking coffee, it will have carry those benefits with some regularity. And I don't think it's leaps and bounds, but the there's a measurable difference in how people feel when they're drinking caffeine or not. I think it's caffeine. I don't think it's just coffee. But
Mm,
coffee is an incredibly complex beverage. It seems to be one of the most complex foods we consume.
wow.
We don't even know everything that's in there. There's over 1,000 chemicals in there. I say chemicals, I mean, things that are unique, molecular build. Um, More complicated than wine, more complicated than alcohols. It's just there's a lot going on there. We don't even know all the things, and that's why it's kind of magical. Is that it's still a black box or brown box. Um, there's, you know, we're talking about the ritual. I think I don't know. This is totally a wild guess, right? There's certainly the biochemical response we get to coffee on mental health, but it wouldn't surprise me if the ritualistic aspect has something, right? You're looking forward to it. It fulfills a sense of self, a sense of thing that's happening. I bet that plays a role because I've
Yeah.
seen that with just people I know and how routines can really help people get through their lives, especially if lives are complicated. So I'm willing to guess that there's some effect there too.
Yeah. Yeah, and we talked about morning routine, and we talked a little bit about how coffee has been used in religious practices and ceremonies, which was really cool. I hadn't thought so much about that. Um, are there other examples? I mean, people meeting at coffee shops. Is there anything more to say about or different cultures and how they meet around coffee?
There's two ideas there. So let's start with the meeting. Uh, there's a there's some sociology work in the 90s, which when like the cute cozy coffee house was really taking its in its stride. And this researcher, whose name unfortunately eludes me right now, came up with this idea of the third place. You have home, you have work, and you have the third place, which is a coffee shop. Because people in our country, in the United States, right, they started using it as a extension of their lives. And that really sort of defined coffee for a while. That this is third space and helped define Starbucks really. And then Starbucks lost that, and now they're trying to get it back because they strayed too far from that. So, what does it mean to a person, socially or culturally or emotionally, that there's this place that's not tied to your obligations of family or mundane life or work that you can go to and be in? And I don't think that's been well studied that I know of. I haven't looked, but I suspect that's a really important thing. And that's how it is in the United States, right? Um, if you go to a place like Europe, coffee is really important, both for meeting socially, but also as part of one's identity, right? Especially in Italy, right? Italy invented espresso. You can go to Italy, people will walk into a cafe like place, they'll order espresso, they'll drink it, and 5-10 minutes later they leave, and it's just something they do a lot, and it's part of their experience. Um, Ethiopia is the home of coffee, and people describe this coffee ritual in Ethiopia, which is a bit of a ritual when you have an event, but it's also sort of the way they just do it, and they're a lot of their day is geared around having coffee and a coffee experience.
Hmm.
Um, and they are the founders of coffee, and there's a lot of interesting story and history and culture there, which I'm going to totally gloss over right now. We think of coffee as being the thing, but of course, in other countries, it's tea, right?
Yeah.
Particularly in Asia, right? and they're shifting over to coffee because of Western influence, but they had this longer history of tea drinking and culture, and that plays the same significant role.
I was just thinking of that as you were talking because I spend so much time in India,
Mm,
and it's the chai, the little cups of chai, and it's so important. You know, you go to a shop, um, and you don't just shop. First, you're invited for have a little chai, and it's like a little shot of chai.
yeah.
Or you're shopping and you're looking at fabrics, and while you're there, they send someone out to the chai stand to bring you back some chai.
Oh,
Yeah, and it's like all day you're being invited into drinking a lot of chai, and it has a lot of sugar in it, which is also something maybe to say about what happens when we add sugar and milk and other things to our coffee and tea. But there's it's something very special about the relationship and the relationships that are built around
mm,
just sharing in this warm caffeinated drink together.
right. And it doesn't debilitate us, right? You would, of course, would also enjoy, say maybe an alcoholic beverage, but if you're doing that all day, it sort of changes the nature of your consciousness. But these stimulants, which are kind of can be special, right? They enhance the experience for most people. Um, and of course, the sugar and spices, which can be added, just make it a complex, more interesting thing.
Mm, yeah. I mean, I do have a few clients who have suffered from panic disorder and panic attacks.
Mm.
And for them, I have to steer them away because, so I would,
Stimulation too much.
yeah. So stimulants can, from what I've read and what I've seen, um, sorry, for folks who are having a lot of anxiety or a lot of panic. Now, there are times when they can be slowly added back.
Mm.
Um, so that's exciting if that's for you. Obviously, for pregnant people, it's
Yeah,
often,
recommendations to limit how much caffeine intake.
yeah. So there are times.
Yeah, but also both tea and coffee we've learned how to remove most of the caffeine. So you can still drink these beverages, really great examples of them, and skip that risk or that problem if it's a problem.
You found a good cup of decaf. I would like to hear that.
I've had some amazing cups of decaf in my day. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's such that you wouldn't even guess that they were decaffeinated. Part of the problem with decaf coffee is that we were really bad at doing it for over 100 years, and so was it the process was just not that good, and so we would use bad coffee, and so bad in, bad out. It was always going to be bad, and then we started refining the process, and people thought, oh, what if we use better coffee? Oh, it comes out better. So the, they do exist. The ultimate problem is that most people don't drink decaf, so there's little incentive still for a lot of companies to to encourage a whole historical chain to create really good decaf. It's a bummer, because when I was growing up, and people came over for dinner, just for dinner or for parties, whatever, there was always coffee with dessert, always, 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 and always caffeinated coffee. And now almost everybody I know is like, it's 2 o'clock, I can't have coffee, right? And we're not even talking about like after dinner coffee. People just don't drink caffeine the way they used to, in my limited, sociological, measurement here. Um, but good decaf solves that problem.
Yeah.
And it's nice because not only is that great coffee ritual in the morning, but it's still good at night. It's still, for me, it still resonates like some of that really great experience of drinking, especially in a social context. It really adds
We
to it
need to
for me.
create the demand.
Right,
we,
right. There's this chicken or the egg problem, right? People don't think there's good decaf, so they don't seek it out. And if they knew about it, but the people aren't going to make more of it until more people seek it out. So
okay. I don't know. I think we might be onto something here. I'm getting some ideas, some new
excellent.
business ventures. I remember just being pregnant and all the things you can't have. And
Crushing, I bet.
yeah, there's definitely a market there.
If it's any consolation, it was when my wife was pregnant. It was really crushing for me too, because right, drinking coffee together was a thing we did, and she would have her cup a day, but we both had to suffer that.
Yeah.
Her more than me. I know.
No, it changes things, especially when it's such a big and important part of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if, and this is just a total guess, and I'm guessing I'm wrong, but like, has the amount of caffeine changed in coffee over time where like they're putting more, somehow there's more caffeine in the beans than there used to be, or?
That's a really interesting question. The answer is almost certainly no.
Okay.
So we don't add caffeine to coffee. There's one or two brands that do, which, all right, fine. Your people also take caffeine stimulant pills, right? So that's for some people. So caffeine is naturally occurring in coffee. There's something genetic component to it. We know that different varieties have different amounts, different species have different amounts, but we don't really know why caffeine varies within a plant. We don't even know if you grow the same plant in multiple places, exact same plant in multiple places, if the environment plays a role. Like it's an interesting question, but not important enough that anyone's ever needed to answer it, or someone's ever funded that research, I should say. Um, and there's a lot of talk about, we've already talked about how brewing coffee can influence caffeine content. Um, but also roasting, people talk a lot about roasting. And since I have the opportunity, I'm just going to lay it out there. So if you take, you take a big batch of coffee from the same couple of trees, even I've done this research because, in grad school, you have too much time sometimes on your hands. So harvested some coffee from a couple of trees, broke it up into different lots, and roasted it across different, roast levels. Really, really light, really, really dark, and we tested the caffeine content. And it showed what everybody else's data showed, that as you roast coffee darker and darker, you start to lose little bits of caffeine. So yes, a darker roast does have less caffeine than a really light roast. But it's going to be a really dark roast, really light roast. But the caveat is that it's a mathematical reality. But in the real world, if you drink a cup of coffee a day, your body will not notice the
Okay.
difference. It's so small. So nobody should ever think that choosing a roast level has a relatively important impact on their caffeine content, because the coffee itself, the bean itself, is going to be inherently more important. Unless you're drinking the same thing roasted different ways, you'll never know. And to test for caffeine it's not complicated if you have the tools, but that kind of lab equipment is not standard, right? It is for a chemistry lab, but your little coffee shop on the corner is not sending their beans to a chemistry lab to do it. It's too expensive and too bulky. And so nobody really knows how much caffeine's in their individual whatever. Very few. By very few, I mean you'll never come across them unless it's a research lab. So don't even worry about it. Just accept coffee has caffeine. It's going to vary for a number of reasons, and just drink it and just accept it.
I appreciate you kind of debunking that for us, because that was definitely a misconception that I had.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good one. You mentioned that there are so many different chemicals in the coffee bean. Are there any
Mm-hmm.
other chemicals that are important to discuss?
Oh, yes and no. So, as I said, there's lots and lots of stuff in coffee. And there's the stuff that makes coffee brown. There's probably some of that which is valuable for us. So, one of the magic health words with food is antioxidants, right?
Oh,
Things
yeah.
that can scavenge activated oxygen. Um, if our bodies can not respond to those, but get captured by something else, then we think this does good things for us. So coffee's loaded with antioxidants. All the brown stuff, a lot of the brown stuff is antioxidant potential. There's caffeine, but there's some related molecules. For example, theophylline, theophylline, which vary their concentrations versus tea and chocolate. Those have similar but different physical responses for us than caffeine does. I just saw a news article this week about, I think it's one of the chemicals that raises cholesterol, actually. I think, don't quote me on it. That looks like it might have a good potential for weight loss. Again, it's not like drinking all this
Mhm.
coffee is slimming my stomach any. Not enough, anyways.
It's an appetite suppressant, right? A little bit, or
I think caffeine is, and caffeine's been used a lot, but there are other chemicals that might be having an important role.
mhm.
And if what other things are influencing our the mental capacity part of it. If it's not just caffeine, there must be other things there. I, there's so much stuff, and it's really hard to, from a research perspective, to say, okay, let's just say there's 100 things in coffee, right? That could be bioactive, right? And each, how you look at that one thing across a population and control the quantity of it, like it's just doing chemical studies on people is hard. Never mind when you have a very complex thing,
Right.
which is why we don't have stupendous data on it because it's just hard, and that's okay. Um, I appreciate people want to be healthy and they want to consume things that push their bodies in a healthier direction. But we sort of have to accept the limitations of what we can know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even if it's you're eating the most healthy superfood in the world, right? What is it? Gonna be pomegranate or acai or blueberries or like whatever the thing of the week is, right?
Yes.
Are you also exercising? Are you drinking all that coffee with sugar and milk? Like, we're much more complicated than a thing we eat.
Yes. No, I appreciate that, yeah, the pseudoscience or like the whatever gets the headline, and the way some of the the research is then fed through the media and stuff. It's important to
Yeah,
take
right. Oh, the media has its, yeah, definitely has its interpretation of it.
exactly. They pick one line. Oh man, there's so many places to go. I feel like it's important to talk about maybe some ways we should choose our coffee, some of the ethical considerations.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a hard one. It's a big one. So let's get a global perspective of what's going on with coffee. Um, and I'm just going to put it out there because it's fun to make this comparison to wine and alcohol in the West. So people, wine making in human history has largely been done by wealthier people in what we think of as is the West, the wealthy West or the North. And that has caused um, respectful, admirable production industry. Where, some farmer in France who's growing grapes to make wine lives a good life because everything is priced in a way and it all works in a way that satisfies that standard of living in that culture. A lot of our fun tropical things, on the other hand, have been built on the backs of ugliness and slavery and colonization, right? So almost everything in the tropics, tea, coffee, fruits, chocolate, all these things have been produced in terrible originally by these colonizers, by these rich Westerners for themselves at the expense of the people doing it. And there have been revolts and there's been independence. There's a lot of things have changed in the course of history. So if we go to Guatemala or Zambia or Haiti or wherever, like how have things changed? And have they changed in an important way? They have changed in important ways, but the poverty cycle hasn't changed all that much. There are obviously exceptions, right? There are coffees out there grown by people who are good to everybody who works in the system, who have made enough money where they are now, wealthy and have resources and can do better things for their farm and hopefully their farmers and the pickers. But most people who grow tea, coffee, chocolate are poor, really poor. When I first went to a coffee region, I was 25, 26. I was just starting my PhD. I went to Zambia, and that's when I really saw poverty, right? Growing up in the US, I was a middle class kid. You see pictures of it in magazines, right? National Geographic, or you see something on TV, but seeing it and experiencing it, right? What is it to see someone live in a little thatch roofed hut with no running water and none of the things that to me are perfectly necessary, right? I mean, at the time it was necessary. Now I just recognize it as different. Um, and most people who produce coffee live in a poverty world, which is heartbreaking. And many of them are content or they're happy or they're struggling, but their psychology is surprisingly healthy because that's how they've grown up, right? So as consumers of these things, how do we, for the best scenario, how do we support those people in a way that's ethical and humane? And the answer is it's really hard. Um, as a as a buyer, you can try really hard to find a supplier, a roaster, who is really familiar with where the coffee comes from and know things and maybe has even been there. And in some ways, that's a really great way to do it. Find a roaster who has relationships with farmers, but there aren't that many of them. Most coffee that you get is anonymous at best, so you don't really know. And we're sort of our hands are sort of tied in that regard. Um, and there's how do we change the situation? There are books written on this, and there's no good solutions yet. That's why we still have this problem. I'm going to put it in a weird sort of plug for coffee grown in the West because um, there's not much of it, but we know more things about it. When I think of the West, I'm thinking of Hawaii, Puerto Rico. Um, I don't know if I want to say Jamaica. I don't know a lot about the Jamaican industry, but it seems like there's some better things there because their prices are higher and there's more structure there. Um, and there's some pockets. But you know, I live in Hawaii. I know a lot about the Hawaii coffee industry. I've thought a lot about pricing and farming and what's going on. And just to give people some context, right? If you buy a pound of coffee grown, let's say in El Salvador, it's going to cost you anywhere from let's say $10 to $20, depending on how specialty it is and what the its provenance. If you buy a pound of Hawaiian coffee, if you're not buying it for at least $50 a pound, you should be worried, right? You should be suspect to quality. And I have access to coffees here that are easily $89 a pound roasted. So the price difference between a Hawaiian coffee and say most of the rest of the world is significant, as would be true in Puerto Rico because they're also part of the United States in a sense. They're a protectorate. Um, and the reason why it's really important to focus on this is because the reason the prices are higher is not just because these tropical little islands near mainly the United States are wonderful, romantic, and we can just charge an arm and a leg for it. It's not the case. Our farmers are not making crazy money on their 3-4 acre farms because it's expensive to grow things here. But part of that expense is treating everybody along the chain who's producing it properly. And the farmers who own the operations, right? So the way it works in most places around the world is that you might own a farm, but you're not doing all the labor, right? You're hiring people. And so you might be a little more successful than the people you're hiring, which is not uncommon for, economic employment situations. But here in Hawaii, right, the farmers all want to live like Americans, right? They want cars and TVs and cell phones and go on vacations. So they're going to charge a little bit more to support a lifestyle that the consumer hopefully also has. And the workers are subjected to United States laws, so they have minimum wages and they have protections. So if you really want to be ethical about the purchase of tropical products, buy them from places in the tropics that you can trust the government. It's not the only way; it's a sure way, but you can also, find farmers and find companies. Like there are companies who are vertically integrated that have cafes in the United States and sell their roasted coffee, but also their family is growing it in Colombia or something, right? There's ways. It requires responsibility and time and energy on the buyer. Uh, One of the ways that we tried to get around that onerous existence is something like fair trade, for example. Right, fair trade was designed so that the farmers were supposed to be given a fair price for their product. There's a price floor, which is always higher than world price, and if the world price caught up to it, then their price floor would go up. And it was supposed to help guarantee for the consumer and the farmer that everything is better. And in many cases it is, but not all cases. Different fair trade is there's a lot of research that shows that in some places it's been quite beneficial, in some places it's not. And there are other social scheme certifications that exist which lend more credence to how the coffee was grown, by whom, and those conditions. Those help. It's not always a surefire way, but it's an option. So I suppose if you're rolling the dice, you're going to get better odds with one of the certifications than you are if you're not using them.
Okay. And is it important um, for health, do you think, for the coffee to be organic or?
Oh, good question. There, let's talk about a little chemistry real fast, because it's gonna. Generally I'm gonna say no. I don't think it's important, but let's talk about chemistry. So let's say we talk about organic farming. We mean not the use of synthetic agrochemicals. So it can be synthetic fertilizers, or it can be some synthetic pesticide or herbicide that gets sprayed nearby, right? And these are things that we've made in the lab that potentially could be bad. They're obviously bad to something, right? Because they're killing something. Or are they bad to humans? And there's that question alone, right? Are these things bad for humans? And I don't want, we can get into that, but not yet. All right, so let's say your assumption is, I want to know if I spraying this thing on or near the plant, is it getting into the plant and eventually getting into my system? Right. So you know what that chemical is, right? Let's just use Roundup as an example. You know what Roundup is. You can test for it everywhere along the chain and see, is it still in this product, or is it on this leaf, or whatever it is. So coffee is the seed of a plant, and the seeds are surrounded by fruits. And so if something is being sprayed on a coffee tree or put in the soil, is it getting into that seed and held there? And then is it that thing making its way all the way through the processing steps, past roasting, past brewing, to get into our cup so that it gets into our system? So because coffee is a seed, already the chances are much lower that any of those chemicals are going to go through that system. Now, there obviously is some research looking at residues of those chemicals in the seeds, and most of the research shows very, very low levels, if any, showing up. Now, the important chemical idea is coffee goes through a lot of steps, right? There's processing on the farm, and there's roasting, and roasting, makes coffee from, a boring green seed to something we really love, which has lots of, chemicals we talked about. So what if that thing that was sprayed or put on the plant did make it through the seed, goes through, but it changes, right? Because of some process. But we're not looking for that change, and we don't know if it does change, if that's important, right? Does that byproduct have some role in our system? The assumption is no, because you can't track it, even if the amount of chemical research to figure that out would be really hard. But the original thing that we are looking for tends not to be there. So in general, does it make a big difference to human health, a consumer? Probably not. Is there a really good conversation about the people who are applying these chemicals, and are they doing it well? Are there rules around how we are supposed to be spraying these things? Yes. Are there guidelines on the package? Yes. Does that translate in most places to being followed? Probably not. For a variety of reasons. I've talked to farmer friends who, the whole bodysuit. First of all, you have to get the whole bodysuit in no man's land, Guatemala. And then people have to be able to read the label and understand, right, what the English is describing, and then they have to do it. And, it's really hot in El Salvador when you're applying chemicals. It's no fun to have one of those suits on, so maybe people don't when they should. So there's the responsibility of the manufacturer. Yes, here's how this can be safe if you do it this way. But then there's the reality of whether that's really happening and whose responsibility is that.
Wow. A lot
I
there.
wish it were easy. I know. I wish it were simple, but
I love that. I love your mind, and I really love that, how exacting you are, and that you don't give us just straightforward answers, but all that context, because it helps us to think and how to think through these problems. And I feel like that's so much of who you are. And what I've, picked up in this conversation. I know you have so much more knowledge. We didn't even just scratch the surface of all the growing and a lot of what is like the, crux of your work. Is there something particular, like I didn't ask you, that you feel is important for this audience to know, or final thoughts to share?
I think just recap, right? I want to recap the idea that there's we think about coffee and health or coffee and the human experience. There's a psychological component, right? There might be the ritual, the familiarity, or the things that or the memories, right? Oh, I used to drink this as a kid with what you know. There's this psychological thing which is harder to measure, which seems to be really important. And it doesn't have to be coffee, but it could be, coffee's a thing it's easy, in my opinion, right? Easy to embrace some sort of experience ritual around it. And then there's that true, biophysical, biochemical response that we have to this product, which seems to indicate, right? The research seems to indicate it's definitely not bad for the vast majority of us, and it might be good in small ways. Um, but it's complicated, and new things are coming out all the time, and be a little wary of how the media describes something because they only have so much time and space and understanding that sometimes they're doing what they can, and what they can is not really the right version of it. It happens a lot, and every so often, even recently, I've fallen into a media report of something which I rallied against, and then realized, oh, that's like the last two sentences of the whole journal article. It has nothing to do with most of the article, but the media ran with it, and then it's easy to fall down that ladder, that slide. Um, so you can't massively research everything. So just be aware that um, the version you're getting may not be the most accurate, most detailed, the most important version of what the story is.
Mm, yeah, such wise words. And that's why we have experts like yourself on to bring more detail than, what we can get on a headline. For people who want to learn more about you, I know you have some books out, and tell folks where they can find you.
Well, I like to, be as available as possible all over the magical internet. um, so I do have two companies. I have a consulting company, Cafe Consulting, which is focused strictly on coffee, mostly on the production side, but I've done some consumer side and mid-business side stuff. If you're in Hawaii, I have a very tiny little company that focuses on selling coffees that support our industry in a variety of ways. I don't really ship very often, so you have to reach out and beg me to ship you something. And
And what's
that's
that
largely
company
for,
called?
oh, Grok Coffee. Sorry, Grok Coffee. That's from Robert Heinlein's Grok, where the word comes from. If you don't know it, go look it up. Um, you could type in my name in any search box and you'll easily find me. As far as I know, I'm the only Shawn Steiman who exists. Certainly with the spelling. There might be a version of Shawn Steinman, but that's a different person. Anyway, type in coffee and Shawn in Hawaii and you'll get me. No problem. You can
We are
learn all
going
about me
to
in my
link.
book.
We're going to link all your
All my
your
things.
websites, and folks will be able to find you in the show notes. And I'm so glad that my research led me to you, Shawn. This was so cool, such a pleasure. The only thing that would have made it better is we were sipping coffee together. So
All right.
I hope one day I'm in Hawaii having a cup of coffee with you.
That sounds like a great plan. I support that.
Thank you
Thank you.
so
It's been a lot of fun. It's been an honor. I'm really delighted that you were interested. Thank you.